So what have you heard from people who don't believe that like climate change is a real thing? Like, what are their reasons? Because I haven't really dug into that much, but I mean, I hear people kind of deny it, and don't think they're like, what it's not a big deal.
I think one of the main problems is that it's been politicized, and people think, at least in this country, that liberals think one thing and conservatives think the other. And I would say, in general, not in every case, but in this country, liberals believe in climate change and conservatives don't. Now, I realize that that doesn't encapsulate everyone,
Right.
but I would say on average that's probably the case. And I think one of the issues is since the other side is saying it, and especially how tribal our entire society has become,
Right.
people will just disagree with anything that the other side says. But for the longest time, I had heard of it almost like saying that scientists are saying that it's not the case. Like, I remember when I was younger, I would hear things like, well, there isn't a scientific consensus on this, or scientists can't agree, or scientists are still looking into this. Or you'd see on the news, you'd see debates where, let's say they were going to have a climate change activist or a scientist or somebody talking about climate change and some of the things that we should do to correct some of these problems that we're creating. And then the other side would be upset. So these so-called news programs or channels would then decide, well, we'll have somebody for and someone against. So then when you're watching this, it gives the false impression that it's a debate and that it's 50-50. But in reality, it's not anywhere near that.
Yeah.
In fact, a little bit of history on this. So scientists have actually been talking about climate change and hypothesizing how human beings could negatively affect the planet for a long time. But really, it came into the spotlight in the 80s, and or maybe the late 70s, early 80s, late 70s,
Okay.
somewhere in there. And at least from what I've read online, and I've looked into this a lot because I find it interesting. I find it mostly interesting that there are so many people that think it's a hoax. But it started out with a bunch of studies actually being done by the scientists at ExxonMobil. And, they were looking to find out, like, some people had made comments about how it can't be good for us burning fossil fuels. And so they actually just started doing some research into it. And they started looking at, what are the negative effects? Because, I mean, hey, for all they knew, there might be no negative effects. And if they had a bunch of scientists proving it, well, then that would be great for them. But what ended up happening is they showed the negative effects it could have on our climate, on our atmosphere, what warming the planet would do. And these are all things that they said, would happen over the next, like, 40, 50, 60 years. And they actually started publishing papers and going through the peer review process. And that's when the oil companies kind of started shutting things down for the fact that they were just like, whoa, we asked you to do one thing and now you're doing this. And they're like, well, this is how science works. We have a hypothesis, we test it, then we have our peers look at it, then they test it, and then we start to come together with a consensus so we can come up with some type of theory. And but by that point, it was already too late. Like, it was just out in the public, and other scientists were really starting to seriously look at it. And so I'd say by the mid 80s, it looks like something like, I want to say 70 to 75% of climate scientists were going, okay, there is a problem and we believe it's us. But if you look at the media, maybe not as much now, but definitely like 10, 20 years ago, you'd think it was 50-50. But I don't think that was really the case. I mean, once they actually started working on it and finding out if we're doing something bad, from that point on, they all seem to be in a consensus. And again, in a consensus, just for anybody who maybe doesn't understand, that means the majority.
Yeah.
And so anything over 50% would be the majority.
Okay.
Also in the 80s, we started talking about the ozone. And, we had a lot of chemicals, especially used in refrigerants like air conditioners and refrigerators and things. Remember, there was that big push to change from certain chemicals to other chemicals because we were creating a hole in the ozone.
Right.
And there was a direct correlation to that to skin cancer. And that was more of like an immediate threat. And so through legislation and cooperation with other countries, those chemicals are now actually banned. No manufacturer uses them anymore, mostly because the handful of countries that don't ban them, it doesn't really matter for their sales. So like if you were making a car with an air conditioner, you wouldn't use these dangerous chemicals. You'd use the approved chemicals because you'd want to sell them in all the countries that have banned them.
Right.
So you might as well make one product that works. So we were very successful there. And we proved that there were holes in our ozone and that this was a direct contributor. And nowadays, you don't really hear very much about the ozone.
Right.
And that's because there still are holes in the ozone.
But did it repair itself?
But yes, a lot of the damage has been undone. And so kind of going back to like skeptics or deniers for climate change, the other thing I hear, besides there isn't a consensus, is, it's almost very arrogant for us to think a planet this size we can affect. But we've already proven that we can affect that because of the ozone holes and the fact that most of that damage has been undone now, or at least headed in the correct direction. That is a prime example of what happens when we all get together and decide enough's enough. We're not going to do this anymore. And I just, that's a lot of these reasons I hear, I just think, what about this? Like you say, we can't make a global change. What about this?
Right. Well, yeah. And what's interesting about like the ozone repairing itself is that you could easily see how people would come to the conclusion that, that's just the planet kind of like going through those changes and repairing itself. And they don't equate any of the changes that like humans made, to.
But we could directly see where the holes were, and they were basically where we were.
Yeah.
We were causing it.
Yeah.
But then now back to the consensus. So for a second, so if we start going through the timeline of how a lot of this modern, either whether you're using the term global warming or climate change or whatever is happening, is or how you're using that term, I should say, in the modern sense. So in the 80s, we kind of looked at like fossil fuels and things like that, but we were also looking at other chemicals. Like I said, there were chemicals that badly damaged the ozone, and they were chemicals that would hang out, that would cause the ozone not to reform in that area. And once we stopped releasing them into the atmosphere, the ozone was able to reform in that area. So we were looking at all types of effects on our atmosphere and what different chemicals would do. And we knew that CO2 was a bad one. It's not actually the worst chemical for global warming, but it's the one that we release on such a huge amount. I mean, from creating electricity to powering ships to powering cars we're just releasing it all over the place.